So, Marvel's Hawkeye finished up a while ago, and it was a nice holiday superhero show. Now, I'll be honest, when this show was announced, I didn't really care all that much. I think we can all agree that Hawkeye was one of the most underwritten and underdeveloped characters in the MCU, which is really weird when you think about it because he's one of the original 6 Avengers. But the thing is, up to this point, the other 5 Avengers have gotten lots of characterization, save for maybe Hulk. Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor each have their own trilogy of movies, and Black Widow got her movie showing her past in the Red Room and her surrogate family. Hulk might have been the only one who was about equal to Hawkeye as far as characterization went, but even with Hulk, we got a closer look at the internal struggle between the scientist and the monster that made up the superhero in movies like Ragnarok and Endgame. The only character left that we still didn't know a whole lot about was Hawkeye, and they even referenced that in the show itself when Kate told Clint that he was a hard superhero to market because he was so low-key. I will say, though, that I think the show does a really good job using everything that we already know about Hawkeye and expanding on it to create the premise for this series. Up until this show came out, the most noteworthy things about Hawkeye that we knew were pretty much 3 things. He worked with Natasha before the Avengers, he loved his family, and he went crazy during the blip and targeted the criminal underworld as the Ronin. And while that may not seem like a whole lot to work with, this show takes those 3 things and expands on all of it to its furthest degree, and I like that. To start with Clint's past relationship with Natasha, I like how they used that to help drive his PTSD, and I like how they also used it to mirror his relationship with Kate. There was that really good scene of Clint catching Kate before she fell off the side of a building, and you could hear the same music that you heard in Endgame when Clint was holding on to Natasha before she sacrificed herself. They also used Clint's relationship with Natasha to introduce Natasha's sister, who we met during the events of Black Widow, Yelena Belova. I really liked Yelena's quest for vengeance on Clint, who she believed was responsible for her sister's death, only to realize at the end that he wasn't to blame, and it allowed both her and Clint to have some type of closure with Natasha's death. I also really liked Yelena's relationship with Kate. That scene of them just having what Yelena called a girls' night, complete with mac and sriracha, was really cute. However, I will say that the one thing that I didn't like was whenever Yelena would fight Kate, because every time they fought, there was just no tension because neither of them were really trying. And I get that that's the point, like because Yelena and Kate actually like each other, they're not really trying to hurt one another, more so just stop the other person from doing whatever it is they're doing. It's kind of like when you get into a fight with your sibling and you're trying to maybe just teach them a lesson or put them in their place, but you don't actually want to hurt them because they're your sibling. But yeah, those fights between Kate and Yelena just felt really pointless because they almost weren't trying to fight each other. Also, one thing I will say I didn't really understand was when Yelena said that she was hired by Kate's mom, Eleanor, to kill Clint, but we saw at the end of Black Widow that she was hired by that one woman who was recruiting all these different people, like US Agent John Walker. So unless there's some continuity issues there. Next, talking about Clint's love for his family, I like how they used Clint's family as the constant motivating force behind what he was doing. Like, getting back to his family in time for Christmas was the end goal for Clint, and I like how it created a sense of urgency for this show. Like, there was really no time to waste. Clint had to get his shit done. I also like how his love for his family made for some really good emotional moments where we were able to see Clint at his most vulnerable. And finally, they also tackled Clint Barton's past as the Ronin, and I like how the reputation that was built from Clint's time in the suit followed anybody who put the suit on, including one Miss Kate Bishop, who we'll be talking about next, because I really liked Kate Bishop. It was really interesting seeing this series go back to the events of the first Avengers and seeing exactly how Kate was inspired to become the next Hawkeye by Clint during this time. I was also sold on Kate pretty quickly when we got back to present day as well. Her quick thinking ability, capable fighting skills, and straight up adorable and hilarious personality shown when she got to meet her hero all made for her being a pretty cool character. I especially like her dynamic with Clint. I think my favorite scene of them together was the Christmas party scene. That scene of them bonding together doing Christmas activities was just so cheery and heartwarming that I couldn't help but be completely sold on the two of them together from that point forward. That wasn't the only scene that I thought was really cute either. The LARPers helped make for some pretty cute scenes as well. The scene of Clint reluctantly playing around with them in order to get the Ronin suit back, and the LARPers helping to corral all the innocent civilians away from the battle with the tracksuit mafia. And that's a pretty good segue into some of the problems that I had with this show, because the tracksuit mafia are just not good villains. I don't know what it was, but these guys just did not feel threatening in the slightest. There was no point in any of the scenes involving any of the members of the tracksuits where I felt even a shred of tension or danger. They were just that unintimidating. Maybe it was just the fact that they were like, bro, hey bro, can you help me with my marital issues, bro? I don't want to see Imagine Dragons. I want to see Maroon 5, bro. I seriously couldn't care less whenever I saw these guys. Anytime I saw Matt Riddle or Jon Snow or Maya Lopez, my eyes just glazed over because they were just the worst villains. And it's not just them either. The whole deal with Jack Duquesne and Kate's mom, Eleanor Bishop, was just too predictable. They set up from the beginning that Jack was a bit shady and wasn't to be trusted, but the problem was that they made him almost comically evil, to the point where his apparent evil behavior is just so obvious, too obvious actually, to make him the true villain. Then they show Eleanor talking privately on the phone and being way too melancholy over everything that should worry a normal person, and from there it was obvious that Eleanor was the villain. But on the subject of villains for this show, I feel like now's a good time to talk about my man, Vincent D'Onofrio, returning as the Kingpin / Wilson Fisk from the Netflix show Daredevil. I actually had a feeling that Fisk was going to be making his debut in this show once I heard that Clint was worried about the big guy getting involved and the fact that this guy was being kept a secret. I mean, it could really only be one person at that point that fit that description, and that was Wilson Fisk. But even though I suspected he was coming, seeing him in full 16-bit glory at the end of the penultimate episode still had me screaming. I loved the Netflix Daredevil show, and I especially loved D'Onofrio as Kingpin. But if there was one thing that I was really worried about seeing him in this Hawkeye show, it was the possibility that the MCU was going to Disney-fy Wilson Fisk. You know what I mean. Taking a character that had already been established as a violent and gritty villain from a violent and gritty show and trying to incorporate him into your lighthearted and goofy universe by removing all nuance and depth that the character originally had. I was really worried that this was going to be an extremely watered-down version of Kingpin, at least compared to what we saw in the Daredevil show, and that is kind of what happened. I wouldn't go as far as to say that he's an entirely new character, because that would have been really bad, but he's definitely nowhere near as intimidating as he was in Daredevil. In that show, he was just killing people left and right with his bare hands, but now when Kate is trying to attack him, he just looks mildly annoyed and barely attacks her. Now look, I get it, alright? I understand. You can't really do what you did in Daredevil and just bring that over directly into the MCU. Tonally, it would just be completely off. Like I said, the MCU is lighthearted and fun and goofy and colorful, and even though canonically the Daredevil show takes place in the MCU as well, you almost wouldn't be able to tell because it's so dark and brutal and realistic and gritty and violent. So to just take what Kingpin was doing in the Daredevil show on Netflix and bring it into Hawkeye on Disney Plus wouldn't really work because it would seem extremely out of place. I mean, for God's sake, they introduced Kingpin in the Daredevil show by having him decapitate a man using a car door. Do you really think we could see scenes like this in Hawkeye and then just switch over to these tracksuit mafia guys who are talking about whether or not they want to go see Imagine Dragons? It just doesn't work. And if anything, it's got me really concerned for the future of guys like Daredevil and Deadpool, now that it's been announced that those guys are returning and they'll be incorporated into the MCU. Daredevil and Deadpool worked as well as they did because of how dark, explicit, bloody, and vulgar they were. Now that they're going to be in the MCU, I'm honestly really scared that, like Kingpin, they're just going to get watered down and turn into joke machines, since that's pretty much the common theme among most of the superheroes within the MCU. It's the reason why I wish Marvel would actually take a page out of DC's playbook and give us some mature rated R content, you know? You can keep giving your main audience, demographic, whatever you want to call it, these PG-13, goofy, stupid, fun movies with big explosions and juvenile, childish jokes, but then release some rated R stuff for the adults like us who want to see superheroes like Daredevil and Deadpool represented correctly on screen by letting them be as rude and dark and gritty as they want to be, because that's what we've already seen them as, and that's something that we already know works. I hope I'm making sense right now, because this was the biggest thing I was scared of when I saw Kingpin debut in this show, and I was disappointed to see that I had every right to be scared as far as what the MCU was going to do to Wilson Fisk. But moving on, let's get back to some of the good stuff. I like the music in this show. The Christmas soundtrack really gave this show an authentic holiday feel. I really liked that one car chase scene in episode 3 where it's just like this one long take and it's almost like a first-person perspective as to what it's like sitting in the back seat while Clint and Kate are up front trying to stop the tracksuits from catching them. Like, I got some serious Hardcore Henry vibes from that scene. It was probably one of the best action sequences I've seen in a long time from Marvel. Also, I really liked it whenever Clint had problems with his hearing, and this show employed audio techniques that made us, the viewer, experience what it's like to be deaf. From the muffled voices to the high-pitched ringing, this show does a really good job immersing the audience into what's happening on screen, and I really like that. However, that leads to another problem, because as far as what was happening on screen, the plot wasn't really all that engaging. The whole plot really just revolved around uncovering a criminal conspiracy between all the villains of the show that I previously mentioned that I didn't like. And as far as what our heroes, Clint and Kate, were doing, it was kind of all over the place. It starts with Clint trying to get the Ronin suit back and get the tracksuits off of him and Kate, and then they try to figure out how Jack Duquesne fits into all of this. Then they start going after this watch because, well, I guess because the tracksuit stole it and it belonged to Clint's wife, so he needed that back. Then Yelena showed up, so we had to deal with her, and then they revealed that Kate's mom is working with Kingpin, so now we gotta deal with that. It's just a lot to handle, and I found myself constantly asking, okay, so what are we doing now? And that's the problem. When you start introducing too many elements, the plot starts getting really messy, convoluted, and confusing, and the narrative starts getting a bit unfocused. And then these webs of intricate plot that you're trying to weave with these interconnected problems that all connect together towards the end into one big conspiracy really don't work out too well. And yeah, that's basically it. I think the main positives of this show were the protagonists and like the action sequences, but the villains and the problems in this show that our heroes had to solve were either unengaging, predictable, or messy. I'd say the best things about this show would be Kingpin's official arrival to the MCU, but like I said, that's not even all that exciting anymore, seeing as how they handled him, and the fact that this was just a fun, cozy, sweet Marvel show. So I'm gonna wrap this up and give Hawkeye a 7 out of 10. Oh, and Lucky's the best character in the entire MCU. Alright, bye!